Good morning or good afternoon at this stage, just 12 noon. And I know we're standing between yourselves and lunch, so we won't keep you too long. So I'm delighted to be joined here this afternoon by Lorna Martyn. Lorna is CIO of Corporate Technology Service at Fidelity Investments, and congratulations, Lorna, on your appointment to that role just before Christmas. And James O'Connor, Corporate Vice President for Microsoft Global Operations Service Centre, and also the site lead for Microsoft Ireland. And two people who'll be very well known to a lot of the audience for their generosity as well with the IDA mission and sharing their experiences across the IDA base, particularly with new companies that are exploring Ireland for the first time. So, we are covering Ireland and winning new mandates in the digital divide. So, a topic we could probably talk about for a very long time, so we'll get straight into it. But Lorna and James, you're two of the most successful executives in the IDA portfolio. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about your career to date and your role and how you've landed at the roles you have here today? Maybe Lorna, we'll start with you in that.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Donal. Delighted to be here today. I think both of us have over 30 years, so we're not going to go through all of that, but I would say probably as I think about my career and career development, there's probably a couple of themes that fit in there. So I think first of all, curiosity. I've always been very curious right from the time I started in technology as a 12-year-old in a coding course. I think the second piece of it really has been focused on variety. So I started my career in financial services as a grad at Bank of Ireland, spent about 7 years in telco, and then came back into Fidelity 21 years ago. So, and again, a lot of variety in there. And then I suppose the third piece is really mobility, and that's something that I suppose that's been key in terms of my career at Fidelity over the last 21 years, which has, I suppose, been in lockstep with our partnership with IDA over that time. So, as many of you may not know Fidelity. It's a very large privately owned financial services company based out of Boston in the United States. But we have about 78,000 people worldwide. So it's a very, very broad business. So I think one of the big opportunities for me was to move across a lot of those businesses. So I started in the engineering space as an engineering leader. I had the opportunity to be head of technology for Ireland, to be the site lead for Ireland, and as you mentioned, Donal, most recently in the last 6 months, I've moved into a CIO role, a global CIO role, which is the first Fidelity global CIO role outside of the United States. So fantastic. That's a great win, personally, but I think it's, for me, it's an important one in terms of how mobility can provide a portfolio career in a large company. And I'd say two maybe final things. One is being connected both internally and externally. Network is massively important. You mentioned, that James and I are involved in the ecosystem here in Ireland. I think that's something that's very, very important in terms of building a role as a senior leader, because you bring perspective, not just from within your own company, but from perspective in the broader ecosystem. And the final thing I would say is, kind of driven me all the way is that kind of focus on lifelong learning. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but they're probably the themes that have kind of underpinned my career and the pivots that have happened along the way. Some very good luck and fortune on the way, and some very good sponsorship and support, but really driven by that curiosity and desire to move. And in 21 years at Fidelity, I've had 10 different roles. Each one of them have been an opportunity to build a different capability, which have ultimately got me to where I am today. I
think it was Lee Trevino who said, the harder I work, the luckier I get, so it's more than luck. And James, how about you?
Like a lot of similar themes to Lorna. Firstly, good morning to all of you, and thank you for having us here today. Listen, in my career, I grew up on a farm in Wexford. I had no desire getting into technology. My dad sort of had a plan for me to go do farming, and I changed my mind a couple of weeks after the Leaving Cert, and I literally called a local college, which was Carlow RTC, and they had computing. And that got me into that path. So a little bit like Lorna, I joined Microsoft, and you guys can do the calculation, but I joined in 93, 2 years before Windows 95. Didn't know a lot about Microsoft, but I was reading a good bit about Bill Gates with this crazy mission of putting a PC in every desk, in every office. And that sort of was definitely an inspiration to joining a company like Microsoft. And like Lorna, I started as a systems analyst here in Dublin. We're at a very, very early stage. And the company obviously then transitioned through centralizing our operations here, becoming the European Operations Center, to then becoming the International Operations Center. And then we added many, many other functions over the years. But every single opportunity that came along in terms of taking a stretched opportunity or taking challenging project or an opportunity around that's obviously involved risk. I had opportunities to move globally, going to the US, work in India, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, all through those years, curiosity, taking risks, usually those opportunities come up at the worst possible time. Personally, like at one stage, I remember telling my wife we were going to the US the following week, and we had three young kids under 5. So, but I think all of that sort of helps us, and then the networking completely in terms of here locally, but at a global level, and operating in any complex company, whether it's Fidelity or whether it's Microsoft, you have to work the metrics of the organization and know and build and nurture those relationships and those partnerships as well. So there's some of the probably assets, and for me, I think it's just. You got to learn. Every single day you're learning. And even now in this era of AI, that learning is really ramped up in spades. So that's just a constant journey that you constantly got to be doing.
Fantastic. And James, I'm going to stay with you for a second because Microsoft in the last couple of months celebrated 40 years in Ireland.
That's right, yeah.
And that history is really wrapped up with a lot of the developments in the client base that IDA has seen as well. But congratulations, first of all, on the 40th anniversary. It's a fantastic milestone. You've seen huge changes. Microsoft came here in 1985 and were shrink wrapping floppy disks in boxes and shipping them around EMEA.
Yeah.
And now you're one of the biggest data center companies in the world.
Yeah.
Can you just talk me through the evolution of computers? You've seen it and how it's impacted on your operations here.
We obviously celebrated 40 years last year in Ireland, and again, the partnership with IDA has been central through that whole journey. The setup was in 1985. Actually, we had an event we had, first and foremost, you guys recognized us for a Special Recognition Award together with the government back in March, and we had our Chief Legal Affairs and Vice Chair of our board, Brad Smith, here to receive that award. And then we had another event then on Thanksgiving, which is more around celebrating that with partners here in Ireland and with our own employees. And the Taoiseach came to that event, and I was telling him that the day we set up in 1985, the unemployment rate in Ireland was 17%. So just think about the Ireland of those days. And it was a manufacturing site. It was 100 people initially. It was shrink-wrap product. I think the initial product we started manufacturing here was DOS. For any of you that know what DOS is, for those of you who don't, you can look it up. But it was very, very early days of that sort of operating system on PCs. And then, the journey through that has been all about innovation and about basically continually, putting our hands up for new opportunities that came up within the company and doing that in partnership with the IDA. So we went from a manufacturing site to an operations center for all of the European market, as I said earlier. Actually, we replicated that model in Asia. We replicated that model in the Americas, but the footprint and the blueprint was developed here in Ireland. And then we added lots of different functions. We added, first and foremost, our localization team, which is now full-blown R&D. So we've now got about 2,500 engineers here working on core products, primarily in AI. And that's through that innovation and transformation over many years. We opened up a digital sales center in 2016, and that's now evolved to about a 1,500-person team that's running basically digital sales for all our small, medium-sized businesses across EMEA. Yeah. Our very first, Donal and I were just talking about this in Lorna, our very first cloud data center outside of the US was here in Ireland that we opened up in 2009. And then we have many, many other functions here. So this has got the full facet of everything we do in the company. Yeah. And together now we have LinkedIn, which became part of the Microsoft family. We have Activision, Blizzard King. So it's about 6,500 people here. So through those years, it's all been that transformation.
Yeah, and Microsoft won the PC era, obviously, and the Wintel architecture was really dominated. As computing has evolved into this really fully digitalized era, how do you see that shift happening now, and where is Microsoft in that shift? Yeah,
I think collectively, this is not just a Microsoft statement, but the industry, we're now on our fourth big transformation technology-wise. We started with the PC, as I referenced earlier, then it went to internet and mobility, then cloud, and now we're in this huge, huge transformation of AI. I think we're still at the early innings. We can talk a little bit more about how we see that moving forward. But those transformational shifts really also align to the innovation and the transformation that the operations went through here. I think that's the same for Fidelity and for a lot of the other FDI companies that are here in Ireland, going through those sort of four transformations. And right now, it's actually incredibly exciting to be, the fact that my career has been part of those four transformations. This AI is very different in terms of just the speed of innovation, in terms of probably the disruption, but also the massive opportunities that it brings for our customers and for industry and the opportunity for Ireland Inc. overall. But it's certainly an exciting time to be in the middle of this new transformation.
And we might come back to some of those transformation elements later on. Lorna, you come from a slightly different perspective. You know, you're in one of the largest private companies in the world, financial services company. I guess from my perspective, you're probably a little bit more conservative as a financial services company, and you're a highly regulated industry. You've $16.4 trillion in assets under management. Do you see it the same as James in terms of that speed of transformation? How does it impact a company like Fidelity?
Yeah, I think certainly we see the same speed of transformation. Maybe how we engage with the transformation is a little bit different, you know. So I think about Microsoft as kind of making the pudding in terms of things that we use on all our desktops across the world. We're servicing a business, but technology is very much at the core of what we do. And you mentioned us being privately held. So we've been held by the same family for 80 years. This is 80 years of Fidelity this year, and 30 years of Fidelity in Ireland. And I've worked in companies that have been public, that have been private equity funded, and a family-owned business, and there's a very big difference. So in terms of how we kind of engage with it, is Fidelity takes a very long view. So from the outside, we might look really conservative, but actually, if you look inside the box, we're very, very much enabled by technology. We're sort of often referred to as a financial services company with a technology company at the core of that, and that comes right back from the founder's focus. So Abby Johnson, our current chair, her father was very focused on technology, probably had one of the first mainframe instances, for those of us who remember mainframes, and they're still around a lot in the back end of financial services, believe it or not, in the industry. But how we've actually engaged with that change has been really interesting in terms of we obviously have our core business, and we have to be very focused in terms of how we service that business and how we engage with the regulators. But from a technology perspective, we've always taken a slightly different view in terms of how we look at innovation and how we look at the future. So within Fidelity itself, we have two different entities. So we have the Fidelity Centre for Applied Technology, which is constantly looking out 10 or 15 years ahead. So, in that space, we're engaged and we're working on things like cryptocurrency. We from the very early stages of it, we're involved in quantum computing. We've been working on blockchain for many, many, many years. And then the other side of it is we have what we call our venture lab, which is Fidelity Labs. And that's one that has allowed us to spin up different business models, to test business models to see how they work at scale. And again, very much technology enabled. So whilst it might be slightly different in terms of how we engage with that change is pertinent to our business as it is pertinent to Microsoft's evolution.
Okay. I might come back to some of those themes a little bit later again. James, when we spoke before Christmas in preparation for the session, you were keen to emphasize that despite the changes of the last 30 years, there are really a few key elements that have helped to transform the Irish economy, and how IDA obviously participates in that. You might just touch on some of those for us here, because it's really relevant to the audience here this morning and how they interact with companies around the world.
Yeah, well, I suppose the three critical elements, and Lorna may add to this as well, that we talk a lot about at our corporate headquarters, and when I reflect on the journey we've gone through here locally, and also the transformation in the economy, when I mentioned earlier, like 17% unemployment in 85. Number one, obviously talent, no question. And it's not just the capabilities and skills that we can get here in Ireland, obviously then the access we have to great talent from a broader base across the EU and internationally, and the diversity of talent that we have here, the skill sets that we have, but it's also what they bring differently, I think, into a corporate environment like Microsoft, working with our customers and clients. I think about agility, I think about how they work across teams, how they can influence for impact, there is a really strong working ethic of our talent, I think, is differentiated. And then just in terms of just that natural curiosity and innovation that they bring to whatever role they may be in. So that's currently a big differentiator. It's going to be critical we continue to invest in our talent. And obviously, we're putting a lot of focus into AI skilling because that's going to be a differentiator for Ireland, I think, in terms of global stage and for all of you as you're out there competing and trying to win clients to come to Ireland. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is just the business-friendly environment here. We may underestimate that, but the partnership we have with IDA, with all of the other agencies, with the government here, but just the environment overall, like given all the uncertainties happening around the world right now, there's always stability here. It's an easy environment to work within. Yeah, we have our complaints, and we'll talk more maybe about that later, but when you actually compare Ireland to around the world, and like both Lorna and I have global remits, so we see this in every market, that business-friendly environment and that government engagement, and the fact that when you can bring senior execs here or senior execs around the world, and they can actually connect with our Prime Minister or Taoiseach or with any of the government ministers or with you guys, that's a big deal. That doesn't happen in a lot of markets. And then the third component then is just the broader ecosystem that's here in Ireland, which I think we also maybe underestimate, and maybe we need to be putting more focus into it. Example, academia and all our education providers. I think there's a lot of hidden assets in a lot of our universities that we don't talk enough about, like the innovation centers, et cetera, and the research centers, and I know there's going to be some transformation there. But that broader ecosystem, and then the broader ecosystem of FDI companies that are here, startups that are here. Like I'll give you an example. Like I reference data centers right now. If you go and look at if you go to any of our data center sites right now across the EMEA region, and you walk into those sites, most of the construction companies there are Irish, because that ecosystem started from here in the late 2000s when we started building out cloud centers along with the other hyper scalers as well. So there are three big factors, honestly. There's obviously others we'll talk about, like infrastructure, et cetera, we'll get there. Yeah. But in terms of those sort of three constants right through, in terms of our talent, and in terms of our business and friendly environment with government, and obviously the broader partner ecosystem, they've been three very big differentiators. And
it's interesting, in a digital world that we're in, when we talk about digital capability and technology, they're largely intangible.
Yeah.
And something that we have.
Yeah.
How do we package that? How should we try and package that in terms of our approach to the market from an IDA perspective?
In terms of digital, or
in terms of those things that you can't talk about in ones and zeros, like, that partnership approach, the talent capability, the attitudes.
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. I think there's different ways to package it, but I think when we talk about talent, I think we got to break down what we mean by talent.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually the softer skills we should be talking about as much as the sort of technical skill sets. Yeah. I would also highlight that there's a lot of different reports out recently, but like Ireland there was a diffusion report recently where Ireland were number 4 in the world in terms of AI adoption. That's very strong. We're the second highest in Europe. I think Norway was the highest. Yeah. We need to be talking about those stats, and we need to be talking about what investment we're putting into skilling, particularly on AI skilling and broader. The fact that we have access to talent from across the EU. A lot of people don't know that, right, around the world. Mm-hmm. And the diversity of the talent that we have here. So I think we've got to talk about the broader aspects around what's different about the talent that we have here, maybe that you can't get in other markets. Yeah. And then in terms of the government component and then sort of the business-friendly environment, there's just like, in terms of, again, being part of the EU, but, in terms of stability right now, and again, you compare ourselves to many other places around the world, we probably need to be talking more about that as well, that consistent stability that's here, that certainty, that openness to working with different agencies, government, et cetera. And I think we can package that maybe in a different way. And then the ecosystem we don't talk enough about, honestly. I think we can talk a lot more about the ecosystem that's in Ireland, all the other companies that are here. Like, honestly, my peers are often amazed the fact that I can pick up the phone to any of our competitors here, and I know them all very, very well, or any of the other companies like Lorna and other these amazing leaders that are here in Ireland, and we all have that interconnection. Yeah. That doesn't happen in a lot of other places. Yeah, so I think we can really package that more as well.
Great, that's a great point. Lorna, when we spoke, we also discussed the changes that the last 5 years have wrought on the world of work. Mm-hmm. And we've been through a seismic event in COVID. We've come out the other side of it, but with some changes. But when we spoke, you were keen to stress the importance of how our talent shows up. Can I ask you to just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, and I would build on what James just said about telling our story. You know, we have an international reputation of being great storytellers. We're great at telling stories about others, but not great at telling stories about ourselves. And, you know, quite often when we have senior executives who've turned up, and I mean, I've hosted probably every senior leader at Fidelity in Ireland at some point over the years, and they always walk away and say, there's something very special about the culture and the connection, and there's something intangible, right? You know, but we probably need to think about how we make that intangible more tangible. And I think part of that is actually how we show up. So, you know, if you think about how the world has flipped in terms of working models over the last number of years, you know, we see an awful lot of press around return to work and people's unwillingness to return to work, when truly one of the things that has always differentiated us in Ireland is the combination of that ecosystem talent, but also how we engage with each other and how we engage across the world. You know, we're very lucky geographically in terms of where we sit on the planet. I always say we're sort of the jam in the sandwich. You know, we have that stickiness to the east and the west, and that's, you know, and also, you know, one thing I'll always say about Irish people is within 5 minutes of a conversation, they will find a connection with somebody, no matter where they are in the world. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of that. So I think, you know, how we turn up in person and virtually is incredibly important. You know, James mentioned some of the soft skills, I call them the essential skills, because actually they're more important than ever now, you know, when you may not necessarily be physically in a room with someone, or not physically in a room with somebody all of the time. When you are physically in a room with somebody, you have to actually make it matter. And, you know, even how we structure our work at Fidelity, we structure it in a way to ostensibly differentiate from the kinds of activities we do when we're together physically versus the things we do when we're together virtually. And, you know, I think in order for Ireland to continue to really be a place and a chosen place for major investment, you know, that talent piece needs to continue to develop and build. That connection, the ability to connect needs to continue. The skills, as James said, both the hard technical skills, the business acumen, but also the soft skills, we need to continue to focus on that. Otherwise, you know, what differentiates us from, you know, talent who might be located anywhere in the world virtually? It's actually when we turn up, how we turn up. Yeah. So I think we have to really focus on that. And, you know, in many cases, people got very comfortable with being at home. You know, we hear a lot of, you know, I think some of the press kind of focuses on the negative aspects of return to work or people's unwillingness. In fact, I meet people every day who choose to spend more time, you know, physically connecting with other humans face to face, you know, than I meet people who don't want to spend time together. But I think that's, you know, an incredible part of what's gotten us so far. We need to continue to ensure that our talent really stands out from, you know, from the rest of the world to continue to move forward.
Attitude and flexibility are as important as smarts.
So there's attitude, aptitude. You know, aptitude obviously is important. You have to be able to do the job, but your attitude to doing the job is incredibly important. And, you know, and I think our ability to really, as I say, connect globally from, you know, this location in Ireland, you know, that's helped James and I, you know, we've both spent time in the US, you know, in our respective companies, but being able to make that connection and build those networks and sustain those networks from afar, you know, is really, really important business, a really important leadership trait that everyone who, you know, aspires to spend their career, most of their career in Ireland, needs to develop, Yeah,
okay, great points. So, question to you both really now. So, just before Christmas, we announced our results for 2025. There were, you know, the audience here have delivered a stellar set of results. You know, and from a very uncertain start, where we didn't really know where the world was moving 12 months ago. So, very pleasing. But in moving closer to the title of this session, as we're in this very connected digital world, how is Ireland going to compete? How do we compete now for that next wave of investment where digital will be a really key part of that? We've called it out as a core part of our strategy, as one of the growth drivers of our strategy. But, you know, what are the key points? Maybe James, to start with you. What are the key points we're going to need to focus on to win for the next evolution?
Yeah, firstly, congratulations to all of you on last year's results. They're incredible. And like, again, in a year with so much uncertainty going on around the world, so well done to all of you. I think there's a few different things that's probably very top of mind, and I know Lorna will add to it. I would probably start with infrastructure. I know you had Jack Chambers this morning. And it's physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. So look at both, very much interconnected. And we know, there's a whole bunch of very, very valid reasons as to why we're in a scenario now where we're behind, frankly, in infrastructure because of a massively growing economy, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what we're looking for, at least in companies like Microsoft, Fidelity, is a roadmap, some certainty as to what is coming when. We don't expect all this to be switched on overnight.
Yep.
And so when I think about infrastructure, obviously we want to invest more in data centers here, as an example. We want to have GPUs coming in here, real AI investments coming in here. And, and frankly, we've had challenges with the grid capacity, et cetera. So again, it's more of a certainty component. I think in terms of digital infrastructure, Ireland Inc. all up, including government, need to continue to invest heavily. There's a lot of departments still not on cloud. Is AI really rolled out and prevalent? But we need to be leading in terms of how we're using AI and how we're using digital technologies at a broader level. We need to help our startups and our SME ecosystem work through that as well. I think another area is cybersecurity, which I know is a very, very hot topic right now. But that scrutiny is increasing, and I know the government are making those investments, but that's a very, very critical area. Obviously, regulation, I'll let Lorna talk more about that, but in terms of AI and digital, being part of the EU, or just trying to get that balance right, that we have smart regulation, and obviously that we help, EU and government try and get ahead of, because the technology is just moving so quickly. So there's some of the areas that I think are going to be very critical for us to compete in the future, and also build on the strengths we already have. Don't underestimate, it's not a big list of issues. Of course, we have opportunities, but let's also build on the strengths we already have. The incredible investments we have here, look at the results you all delivered in the past year, the leadership that we have here, the talent that we have here. How do we build on that? But I really do believe we have sort of the next couple of years is very pivotal for Ireland in terms of how it gets itself ready to maximize this next opportunity and wave. And it's really providing more predictability and speed, and all of this is about execution. I think that's what you heard from Jack Chambers this morning, or Minister Chambers, because I think that task force that's been set up, the plan that they published, is so critical for all of us collectively, and we just got to all lean in to help them make sure we get that executed.
Perfect, thank you. And just while you mentioned data centers, I'll just stay with you for a moment on that. So you've announced plans for NACE, for another data center campus, and look forward to working with you on that. Can you just put into context for the audience here how important data centers have become in the digital world? They're not just energy guzzling boxes, they're a big component.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think like a couple of things I would say. If you think, maybe let me break down. If you talk about AI, we think about AI in sort of 3 building blocks at a very simple level. At the base building block, you have compute, and compute capacity is data centers. So it's super, super essential. And then at the end of that, at the beginning of that supply chain is energy. And we need renewable energy. And we have so much opportunity in Ireland on renewable energy, with a lot of opportunity in the West Coast and South Coast, East Coast in terms of offshore and renewable energy, et cetera. So that expanding that grid capacity and being able to get more access to renewable energy and being able to actually build that compute capacity is really, really critical for us. And so, like we're, like all our hyperscalers right now, we're making very significant investments in the compute capacity, because we're trying to get ahead of the huge demand that we have right now in AI and the future demand that we're projecting as well. Yeah. So right now, Ireland's missing out on those investments. We've made significant announcements in the past year alone in the UK, pretty much most countries across the EU. Ireland hasn't been on that list because we've had that capacity issue. And the other thing I would say about renewable energy, we're very committed to making sure we're powering all our data centers on renewable energy. We need to talk more about that. Basically at the end of December, globally, we're now powering all our data centers with renewable energy, which is just huge. We've been very focused on that. So that's sort of one element, or the base element. And so it's so critical, because then that supports the other 2 layers, which is your data models or large language models. And then third, on top of that then, is basically how you interface with AI, whether it's Copilot, whether it's Gemini, all of the other solutions that are out there. And I think our form factors in terms of what we're using, how we're using things like PCs, phones, is all going to dramatically change very, very quickly. But at the very, very base, compute capacity is critical. And so it's a combination of renewable energy and data centers. And for Ireland to have that infrastructure here with the ecosystem I have wrapped around that, I talked about all the Irish companies now that are developing our data centers across EMEA, most of them are Irish. Our leadership team, the team that actually designed, built all of our data centers across the EMEA region, they're Irish. They're based here in Ireland. And I think that's actually very similar for our competitors as well. So hope that helps, but it's a big, big opportunity for Ireland. And it's going to be just a core foundation that we have that based in Ireland in the future.
Yeah, I read a stat from Benedict Evans, from formerly with Andreessen Horowitz, that said most large enterprises using between 400 and 500 applications in their business. I don't know, Lorna, as a CIO.
I think that might be a vast underestimation,
right,
personally, just based on my own corporate services world anyway.
I was going to say, as an enterprise CIO for a globally leading financial services company, do you see anything different to James in terms of what Ireland needs to do to win for the next evolution? There are other points like regulation, obviously, which is going to be big in your world. What are the key factors you're looking at for?
Yeah, I think James has covered a lot on the physical infrastructure, and I would agree. I think data centres get a lot of bad rap, and yes, there's been probably a huge focus in terms of sustainability in that space. I would say that what served us very well in the past is that we're small and we're connected. Yeah. We need to continue to stay that connected, but I think we need to build another layer on that. We need to sort out the infrastructure pieces. I'm again kind of very excited to see some of the recent announcements, and I hope we can deliver on it, because that's something that's very important for our workforce, to actually keep them connected in Ireland. But the second piece of it, I would say, is, and James touched a little bit on, do our national agencies actually demonstrate being digital leaders in the space? I think we need to push there, but I think also the smart regulation piece is very important. I think we need to continue to focus on building not just the digital infrastructure, but also the knowledge infrastructure in terms of how that digital infrastructure enables future business models. So we're seeing a lot of I work in the financial services space. We're seeing a lot of movement in terms of interesting alternative investments. We're seeing a lot of movement in terms of digital assets. We're seeing a lot of changes. I mean, in my corporate services space, is one of the areas that I support from a technology perspective is the corporate accounting and finance spaces. And to actually service those kind of business models, it's a very different accounting model even from what the traditional business is. So I think within our regulators, within our government, and within, I think, our general workforce, we need to continue to invest in that knowledge economy knowledge. I mean, we've talked about capability from an IDA perspective forever in Ireland. That's one of the reasons, when I joined Fidelity 21 years ago, we were less than 200 people in Ireland. We were 50 people in Galway and about 150 people in Dublin. We're 2,300 people in Ireland today, nearly regionally balanced. And all of that came out of capability. It came out of the really great job that we've done in terms of connecting academia and business, in terms of focusing on really good business outcomes. One of the things that we sold to our Fidelity brethren globally is we packaged and we called it, research as a service, right? Yeah. So being able to provide that connection into the ecosystem to really do very interesting work. There's a benefit for the business, but there was also a huge benefit for us as an Ireland location to be able to bring really good work and to create that broader connection. But I think Ireland has to be seen as not just a safe society or a good place to do business. It has to be seen as a digital society, and we have work to do in that space, both in terms of how our government and agencies operate, but also in terms of how our regulators focus and understand maybe what the next evolution of financial services business models are. Okay, that's very helpful. I know the shot clock is running down here, but there's a ton of questions on Slido here. You'd be glad to hear. So I'm going to combine them in maybe one or two final questions for you both. You're both in global roles, which is a privilege for us to have you in Ireland, actually. Maybe just bring us inside the tent a little bit. And I'll start with you, Lorna, given that you're recently appointed to that role. I know you've held very senior roles prior to that, but bring us inside the tent and tell us what's it like being an Irish leader based in Ireland
at the leadership table, and how can IDA leverage that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolute privilege to be able to be based in Ireland. And, you know, when I went for this most recent role, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, it's the first CIO role for technology that Fidelity has had outside of the United States. And when I went, I actually made the case. I said, I think this role can be done in Ireland. And I had a conversation with the hiring manager and the CTO. So I think some of that was the benefit of having sat at the leadership tables, you know, probably throughout 15 years of my career at Fidelity. I've sat at either a CIO table or for the last 9 years, because I was head of technology for Ireland and I was site lead for Ireland for the last couple of years, I sat at our CIO council anyway. So I was actually joining a table of peers that I'd already worked with for many, many years. You know, I think what's really interesting from my perspective is what the others around the table look to us. They look to leaders who are not based in the United States to bring a much broader global perspective, and that actually affords us probably a bigger voice than maybe we deserve if you just looked at it purely from the perspective of representation around that table. I couldn't leave the stage without saying, you know, being a woman in the room is interesting as well. There are a few more around the table at the CIO level at Fidelity, but you know, for most of my career at those senior tables, there hasn't been great representation. So you know, again, it's a privilege for me to be able to kind of fly that flag. But I think what it brings is maybe there's an advantage of being sometimes 3,000 miles away from headquarters, because you can incubate things and bring that knowledge back in. But equally, you know, you avoid some of maybe the unnecessary noise that you run into on the corridors of headquarters if you're there week in, week out. But I think they very much look to us to bring that global perspective.
Okay. That's an interesting perspective. James, have anything different from your side, or?
No, a lot of similar teams, I think. Like, firstly, it is a real privilege. The job I'm doing right now could be, in the past, would have been done out of the US. I think you do have to have that experience of working at corporate and really understanding the global perspective that's happening and what's happening on the ground across the different centers or different teams that you're leading at a global level. I think, like, you know, in terms of the audience here, there is a lot of people that are similar to Lorna and I that are in large global or international roles that are based here. The majority of them have spent time in the US or spent time in the headquarters of these companies. And like, I just look at Microsoft, and we have incredible leaders that are probably low-key here locally, but are very influential and very experienced and highly regarded within the company. And so I think there's an opportunity around how you tap into that community a lot more. Like, for me, I have to put on my global hat and my strategic hat for Microsoft at all the decisions I make. I have to be balanced and objective. I've got teams in lots of other markets, India, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same point in time, I think, to Lorna's point, there's a huge trust element. It's good, at least on the East Coast, there's a little bit of, you know, the time overlap. This is actually a good time zone in terms of trying to manage the Asia teams together with EMEA teams, and obviously then back into the US, even though, you know, my headquarters is on the West Coast, so my life is 8-hour time difference. But you sort of adjust to that and you work to that as well. But that actually, I think, does give us a different perspective, to Lorna's point, in terms of maybe the leaders that are based in the US. We have a much, I think, broader global view. We're much more connected into our networks here locally or at an industry level. And I think that gives us a differentiation in terms of our leadership impact.
Super, and we really appreciate how, you know, we at IDA are wearing the green jersey and you're wearing the green vest. And it's a delicate balance you have to strike. Yeah. So we're almost out of time, so I just want to finish by saying thank you, first of all, to joining us this morning and for the time you've put into preparing for the session here. It's really appreciated. But also the time you give as two very senior global executives to IDA to help with our mission as well. You're an incredibly important part of the ecosystem, and I'd like the audience just to show that appreciation for you here now. Thank you.
I think back at all of you guys, because like IDA has been very, very critical to both our companies over so many years. The partnership is incredible. So just that you're all here, just a big thank you, Nick, on behalf of industry, on behalf of all the clients you're working with every single day. Let's keep the journey going and keep the feedback coming to us as well. But just I think I want to just make sure that thanks go the other way. All right?
Yeah.
Super.
Likewise. Thank you, James. Well said.
Thank you very much.